Moin und herzlich willkommen am
Minett Trail,
dem Podcast von der Minett UNESCO Biosphäre und zusammen habe ich beim IKCNCI an dem Moi. Das an mir an de Minett Trail asrem do de Podcast mat senger neuer Episod an es sind natürlich rëm engkeier net alleng. Jenny vom IKCNCI ist dabei. Moin.
Moin.
An auch Marike vom Moi, dem Musée von der Erbecht.
Hallo.
An wir haben natürlich auch Gast, mal hier bei dir kommen. Der wisst ja Hashtag Minett Trail. Am Minett Trail auf Instagram, da könnt ihr uns followen, liken und ihr könnt den Podcast natürlich auf eurer Lieblings-Podcast-Plattform auch abonnieren. And a little bit special today, we're going to do our first episode ever in English.
Finally, yes.
And much appreciated.
Because we have, and you already heard her, an English-speaking guest. That's Laura Hurst. She's one of our two guests today. The other one is Nickie Lippert. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
And we're talking about something, Marike, that you wanted to talk about for like the whole year already.
Yeah. Our two dear guests today are from the Tiny House Association.
So, tiny houses. Let's start with both of you. Are you both living in a tiny house?
I do. I've been living for like a year and a half almost in my tiny house. Yeah. I do not yet.
But you want to?
I absolutely want to, and I've made it my attempt to manifest this year living in a tiny house, which has been or has a couple of hurdles, which is I think always the case when you're transitioning from one way of living to another.
Yeah, probably. But let's talk a little bit about the concept. Nickie, what's exactly a tiny house? Is there a definition of it?
That's a really good question. So there hasn't been a definition like worldwide or national-wide or Europe-wide of a tiny house. But there will be kind of next week. The ministry gives to the municipalities like réglementé, which is like the papers where they can, like they have a definition or however they can put a tiny house in their municipalities, how they can include it. And they have a definition that is like a not fixed small house means less than 50 square meters, which is quite big for a tiny house already, but they kept it in that way.
But it's interesting that the definition isn't quite set. But what I was going to say earlier is I am living in a tiny house, but it's not a tiny house, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But you're both engaged in promoting those tiny houses here in Luxembourg. How did that idea come up here in Luxembourg? Has it something to do with the extremely high prices on housing, or?
No, not at all, actually. I wasn't there from the very beginning, from the group that is there now. I'm definitely the one that has been working on that topic for over 7 years. But it came up from people that wanted to do like an alternative living, minimalistic, and also community spirit. So it was at the beginning was tiny house, eco village, Luxembourg. It wasn't an ASBL, so there was the group idea to have an ecological kind of living with tiny houses. At some point we took the ecological out because we said we don't want to get ourselves into a way where you have to be like 100% ecological with your tiny house, and that's a lot of pressure to do because like the green stamp is very one that is that people go for it if you're not 100% green. But then we kept the tiny house idea, and for me it just kept in because we wanted to do a living with my parents. At one point we were thinking of like building something, and my parents like an annex or something. And then they said, okay, but at one point we might have to sell the house because we're getting too old later and we cannot do all the work and stuff, and that would be very sad if you have all your like money in there or like live there and we have to sell it because we have to buy something different to live in getting older. And at the same point I was looking like at videos to like less consuming, less plastic, like all that kind of things, and then like in those videos like tiny houses pop up, and then that idea just squeezed in. And I was already in an association that was about community living, but they were more like community apartment with like
So shared flats.
But also have like different common spaces to share and to build together, like financially also build a house together, not only living together. So I came from that direction, and then Tiny House came in, and it got bigger and bigger, the tiny idea, basically, yeah.
But moving from like a normal house to a tiny house means that you have to separate from very much of the goods you have, and you in fact don't really need, isn't it?
And what a relief. I mean, my journey to the tiny house, has been, I would say, over the last 15 years, and really started with this kind of idea, looking around at the things that I have and constantly just reducing, and the idea that, I don't want to live in a really big house. I don't want to clean it. I don't want to have to take care of it and maintain it. And these were some of my first thoughts. I mean, I myself grew up in a very large house. I have 9 brothers and sisters, so it's definitely not a small location that we grew up in. And going from, I don't really want all of these things. I went to school for landscape architecture, and the idea of planning or living in a space that has function and fits the space was really, really important. And I like the idea of having items or owning items that are very special to me and not just, of the next fad or in fashion. And being able to then research and identify the different forms of living that allowed for that. Besides maybe apartment living, or which is very similar in size, if not smaller than tiny houses. But for me now, I've been part of the tiny house community for the last 2-3 years. And what has really solidified me is the idea of community and having, getting to choose the people that you live with. Now, coming back to the definition of tiny house, this is a conversation that we're having in the ASBL right now. What are we representing? Who do we want to represent? Who do we not want to represent? What interests are our goals? And
also the definition, like just the definition of the house, was a huge discussion, and it's always going to be what is our definition. Mm-hmm. We at one point we had a definition which is quite similar to the one that the ministry now comes up with. We said we at one point have to stay with one thing so that it doesn't, we cannot take care of everything. Like all the alternative living, we cannot take care of that.
And also taking into consideration where we are as an ASBL.
Yeah, because I also wanted to ask how it is with container houses. They are different, I think, than tiny houses.
No, they can be tiny houses as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's just a matter of
sourcing the containers.
So we're talking about alternative living. In your opinion, is Luxembourg ready for this? Because as we all know, and why I'm so passionate about the subject as well, is there is a massive crisis happening when it comes to living. And there's also some changes, and some very positive changes happening. Is Luxembourg ready, and what is going to happen now?
This is an emotional question.
It is like
sorry.
bringing this up. It's like it's a very fine line there that we are going also with the regulations that the ministry now gives out to do tiny housing in Luxembourg, because we do come from a whole other corner. We come from the ecological corner to like less of a footprint, minimalistic kind of way. But of course, lots of people see tiny housing as, is this the solution, the only solution they can find to the crisis now? And we have a very strong point of view that tiny housing is only supposed to be for people that actually want to go tiny. Yeah. Because if you just like put tiny houses and then put people in there that don't want to be in there, it's not going to work. Put tiny houses in like gardens and have like garbage going around. Not to say that people, it's a difficult line to go there, because there are also people waiting to have houses, and they will be happy to have any kind of houses. And but for us as ASBL, the point of being there from the ecological minimalistic point of view is there. We also have members in there who say their first thing would be like, this is the only house I can afford. But still they are in the minimalistic thinking as well. So
I think you have to be very, very careful with the idea of quick fixes, especially in the long term. I mean, we look at the housing projects that you see in the United States and the direction that those took, right? I mean, they ended up being poorly maintained by the cities or abused by the landowners, and the tenants weren't actually getting the services that they need, and they became, very divided. They became poor opportunities for class division.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Luxembourg needs to be very careful about, especially considering the real estate industry here.
Nickie, Laura, coming back to that legal framework that you've been mentioning. So was that one of the goals you tried to achieve with your association, to get such a framework, to have the possibility to implement those tiny houses throughout the country?
It actually wasn't in the very beginning. The idea just came like people came together to have a tiny house village. So and we are at the very beginning, we came in and said, we want to do this bottom up. So find a spot, ask the municipality if that would be okay, and then whatever has to be done to realize that project is going to be done. But then it was very quick realized that, like, in order to be able to do that, we need to go national, and we have to do the lobbying, and we have to give this a frame, because municipalities, they will tell us, okay, but there is this is a huge gray zone you're in, we need something more clear. They would say, okay, the Ministère de l'Intérieur, they have to give us a hint that they're okay with the idea, and the ministry long time they said, okay, we don't need to go national, because this is just like a few people that want to do this, so no need to have like a national regulation of it. And somehow we did lots of conversations with politics, with people, with ministries, with municipalities, with on all levels. It came that way, that it now is going to have a national regulation. At least it's not a municipalities don't have to take this in. So it's just like a proposition that the ministry gives to municipalities, and they can either take it or leave it, or they can take it and make some changes. So the municipalities, they can do however they want to do it in their frame they have. There's lots of possibilities. So that's the work that we have been doing the last years. It wasn't planned in the beginning. My personal main goal is still to have that tiny house village. We also have people in the ASBL that want to do they don't want to be in a community, but still want to have a tiny house, maybe alone or in a garden or however. We opened that up as an ASBL to give this idea and have these opportunities as well. That's where it came from. It came from the idea of the village, and then opened up because it was a need to do so.
So you never wanted to do lobbying, but in the end you had to.
Yeah. The more fun thing to do would be plan my tiny house village. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you have a vision, you do what has to be done to make it happen. Yeah.
But I love that. Congratulations. I mean, it is something. It's an achievement, and municipalities will now be able to implement those règlements urbanisme.
Yeah, how great to have it now be a national conversation.
Yeah, and that the communes can think about if they want to, if there is a demand, they can adapt.
Yeah, and to overcome suppositions and make, realistic ideas and have realistic expectations, and to maybe even have pilot projects to even test those expectations or general, stereotypes out.
The thing is that Luxembourg has the unique case of it could be good. It's good and bad that we're that small. One thing is that in the positive way, if now we have like a regulation, it's for the whole country. So everyone has the same, is on the same page there, or at least they have the same base that they can come back to. And on the other hand, everything that we were doing as an ASBL had like a national. Everything that we were doing was like going national, because like on other spots, other countries. They just do in their corner, and they're like the national politics is not very interested in it, so they can try if something works or it does not work before they go on another level with it.
I guess
and this is like everything that we have been watched like
there
national.
are some benefits to not be in the Bundesland and have to go up.
But every baby step we've been doing had
Had a much bigger ripple
Yeah,
than I think
it
we
was
expected
like,
or were ready for sometimes.
But I'd like to come back to your association. How many are you in that association? And I suppose it's been growing since it's been founded 7 years ago.
It was not, the ASBL wasn't found 7 years ago. That was actually like 3 years ago.
Okay.
So before that, we were like a working group. But at one point we said, okay, we have to do like a legal group of it. So if we have a representation somewhere, but we're, at the moment, we're about like 80, I think, paid members in the ASBL, like some more active, some less active, some just there to support family members. My grandma, she's there, she's a member. But around 80 people are interested. We have the homepage, still have to put new informations up there, so don't be that sad if it's not like the last stand of it. We try our best to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got to know a little bit about the concept of the tiny house, about your association. We have some fixed points in this podcast, so we
Structure.
also want to know something about you two, Laura and Nickie.
Yeah, work. Question. Yes, well, let's talk about
Let's get
work.
dirty now.
Let's get
Dirty
down
talk.
and dirty and talk about your Arbeitsaldag. Well, I'm interested to know, you are both volunteers. Nickie, you're the president of this association. Do you have jobs? What do you work from home?
This is an uncomfortable question.
Share as much or as little as you want. I mean, we all know that the world of work is changing rapidly. Many more people work from home. We have digital nomads. People can move into a tiny house somewhere and work on the other side of the world. What does your daily work life look like? What would you like it to look like?
Shall I go first?
Please.
I actually work at a municipality. So at the office, we're organizing events, we're doing social media, stuff like that. So it's like I'm working half-time since I had my little girl. So I'm just working in the morning and then being a mom and then being a president of an ASBL and being a good wifey material to my husband. Not my boyfriend, husband, how do you say that?
Partner.
My puxy,
Your puxy.
my partner. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all work.
So that's a good thing to do. So that's my day is stuffed with that. That's what I do. So
And you, Laura?
Well, my background is in landscape architecture, as I mentioned before, and I specialize in environmental resource management and ecosystem restoration. So moving to Luxembourg after that educational background was really interesting. I think that there's a lot of this kind of growth and mentality happening. Unfortunately, I do not speak French, and this has been a really big brick wall for me. So I think that if I was any less social and curious and interactive, it would have been a very different experience for me here in Luxembourg. I've been here for 10 years now. So for about 6 years, I owned my own business, and this was actually in a craft industry. I would say design. I consider myself a fiber artist. I worked on creating supply chains, and so I sort of transitioned into working with social enterprises and other ASBLs. So I was working with Art Square Lab. They help facilitate various workshops, which actually our most recent workshop, we utilized them, and currently I'm working for Transition Minett. And I did transition into working with communications. I really prefer doing research and writing, but of course, as a communications person, you cannot escape social media. So this is kind of where I am now, and I work part-time or 32 hours with Transition Minett, and actually I will hopefully be the person that is hired by the ASBL, the Tiny House Community Luxembourg, to help with the organization of this. So this makes me feel really good to be able to be working in an industry with social enterprises, with social agendas, with ASBLs, because it goes in line with my values and my morals and the desire that I have for a more sustainable world.
But Laura, working for Transition Minett, you certainly noticed that the Minett has become a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve 3 years ago. Could that be something helping that tiny house movement?
You know, this is a really good question. There's definitely conversations around tiny houses in green zones. I think this is where you're going with this.
Yeah, more or less. I talked about it to one of the responsible people from the forest agency about implementing tiny houses in green zones, and he said, well, we have that strict nature protection law, so it would be very, very difficult.
It will be. It's definitely a goal. That would be a nice thing to have, like, or how's it called in English? Autark.
I don't know.
Like houses that are off-grid. Off-grid. If you have like off-grid tiny houses in green zones, but the regulations in the green zones are very high, and the ministry is very strict about those. If you open it up to green zones, for one person, you have to open it up for other people as well. And this is the thing between like people that really want to appreciate the nature and the living there and living with the nature, and people that just see, okay, there's a spot to put like a house where people can live. This is very difficult. But the ministry now opens up to, we have houses that can go into zone habitation, but they can also, municipalities can always change when they have a spot where they say, okay, this would be a good place. They can go ahead and say, okay, we want to try to make this a space where tiny houses, there's like a zoning for tiny houses where you can only put tiny houses on. That's a possibility, but in green zones you always have the ministry, the ecological ministry that's in there, and that's really strict. That is going to be a very difficult thing to do.
I know for sure that there are some properties that were built on lands that are now green zones, but that there are foundations. I think that would be a really great opportunity to utilize, instead of building new on land that has never been built on in green zones, but to take advantage of properties that were already existing. There
are definitely spots, you have houses in green zones already that have like somehow an exception made, and there you could like put tiny houses on there because it's already like a building land in a green zone, that like a tiny house wouldn't do any difference to that spot.
But let's stick to the buildings. Location for moment. Another point in our podcast is the Kabaisercher we're in. We are visiting one Kabaisercher of the Minett Trail each month, and we couldn't have picked a worse one for you.
It's huge. It's the biggest Kabaisercher we've been in.
Yeah, we said the last time we are in a cub house. I think this one is also not anymore a Kabaisercher, but a cub house.
It's something like a small hostel already.
It is. Very much feels like that.
Having like 12 places to sleep, a real big kitchen. That could be a whole tiny house, this kitchen we're sitting in, or am I wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Definitely.
say maybe the size of Carol's place.
I haven't been to Carol's place, but probably you could do like a second. I'm always like, where can you do like a bigger checking out
Utilize the
rooms?
space.
But yes,
build
this
up,
already
not
could be
out.
like a good one. You have definitely smaller ones, smaller tiny houses than this room we're sitting in. Yeah.
Could you maybe describe the view that you have?
For me, as somebody who's not originally from here, I find it very pastoral. Softly rolling hills. Everything is very green right now because it's spring. We actually have some really beautiful sun. You can see that the leaves are starting to pop and maybe a little bit of flowers. And we're just directly in front of a field with a farmhouse and a barn behind us.
Jenny, can you tell us where we are?
Yeah, we are at the Kabaisercher in Bel-Val, Bieles.
Oh, I wanted you to say Bel-Val. Belle-Vallée.
Ah, yeah. You mentioned that it's so nice with the hills. Yeah, they called the region between Sanem, the commune of Sanem, and Bel-Val or Ash, the Belle-Vallée.
Oh, Bel-Val.
Because it's the nice valley, yeah.
It's very beautiful. It reminds me very much of where I grew up in southern Indiana.
Ah, yeah.
Okay, and being in this Belle-Vallée,
In this Belle-Vallée, yeah.
I think there comes the point where the Industriekultur
Yeah.
comes in, because there has even been like a very famous and internationally famous industry here.
Yes. There was, how you call it, a source, a spring. Here, yeah, a water spring. Here on the, between Ash and Bel-Val, and it was called Source Bel-Val. Yeah,
That's nice.
and it was a really famous water, and it was in fact a farmer who discovered this spring in the ground, and then he made big business of it.
Like really big business. And
And
we're,
Kim Nestle.
No.
we're talking, it was Joseph Statioun who inherited the farm, and we're talking, this was 1885. And they analyzed the water, and it was so pure and rich in salt and minerals, and probably a bit of iron as well.
A little bit. Just a
He
little.
said that it had medical effect or
medical
that
properties.
definitely, I'm sure, would help him sell it more.
And it sold very well until
all over the world.
until the end of the 1920s and
Yeah.
the big economic crisis.
Wow,
Yeah,
internationally.
it got exported onto 4 continents. It was magic water. But isn't it amazing? So we're basically, we can, in front of this gîte, you can basically see the blast furnaces of the Bel-Val. The train stops right in front. So, we're looking at the iron industry.
Yeah.
But this used to be rolling farmlands with very special water.
So on one side we have this historic rolling farmlands, and behind, on the other side
There's-
we have the ironworks.
yeah.
And for people who actually want to come here, just like selling this place, it's like you can't hear the train in here.
No.
Which is very nice.
No,
Yeah.
because there have been like half a dozen trains passing by since we started recording this podcast, and the only thing you heard was that mechanical saw somewhere on the farm
grinder.
behind us.
But so this gîte is ideal for groups. You can go to a gig at the Rockhal or have some kind of event, and you're basically
You're at the Bel-Val in 3 minutes.
So, but you didn't know about that water, but I think there's more to know about
yeah.
the source.
Did you know that in the factory, the water factory, there worked more women than men?
Nice.
Yeah. And at that time it was really rare, because normally women didn't work. And it wasn't also in society, it wasn't so good considered when women worked. So,
But they did have a lot to do with water, because they were doing all the washing and the dishes.
so
they were
they
the
were
experts
already
in water. So
In water.
probably that was that.
I'm so proud I didn't say that. So happy.
That's for a woman to say. That's
Wouldn't
for
have been as funny coming from you.
I didn't even think about it.
But it has something to do with some points we have still until today, because they chose to employ women to reduce the costs. Because they hadn't to pay as much for the women than for men.
And I suppose the gender pay gap was even bigger at that time. Than it is today.
Yeah.
I wonder what tactic they used though to sell the idea of employing women versus men. They couldn't have really just said, well, it'll cost us less.
I think in an industry with men, you can do that. And at that point.
Also, I think I read somewhere that it involved a lot of sticking the etiketten on the bottles. So you need fine finger work for this, don't you?
Yeah.
So they did that manually.
I can't imagine them having a machine like they do today with the glue.
Okay. I mean, we're talking late.
It's like
late 19th
century.
Yeah.
We don't go there.
Cows,
don't
do
go there. That's for dirty talk.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah. So, where are we now? Back to the industrial culture. So I'm not finished with that.
Did you know?
Did you know? I'm done. But we are coming back to it.
It's getting really serious.
And now it's getting serious. Yeah.
That's the question.
Because I have some
Nickie, these
questions
are
for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we talked about tiny houses and places to put them and to build tiny houses. And so we are now as Bieles really. We are working on, the industrial sites who are abandoned, and they try now to redevelop some of these areas. And my question is, do you think that there is an idea to also keep, for example, now in Asch-Schifflange, they start to create a new quarter of between Asch and Schifflange, and I think it's a good idea, or to give a new use not only to old industrial buildings, but perhaps it's also an idea to keep land for some tiny houses.
It would be really nice. And we also said, okay, tiny houses for us, if there are definitely people that would love to not be that close to nature, but they would be okay to be in a more urban kind of way with their tiny houses. And also, like, I would love to see a concrete where you have already like the concrete floor and you just put tiny houses and then greens around. We were in Delft, where we were visiting the tiny house village. That's actually an industrial zone where they put, for 10 years, they gave the opportunity to put tiny houses in there, and it's a really nice place where you have lots of greens. They just keep on putting green stuff in there, and that would be very nice. I think it's really difficult to get through with that because of the crisis that we have.
Yeah. And
if they are putting living spaces in places like that, they would go like up with more like housing for more people.
But wouldn't it be a solution to like use those sites before the
Absolutely.
Rebuilding of them
Absolutely.
Starts? So as a transition phase to have someone living there to
I'm
have
thinking of like Dudelange or the Villeroy-Boch in Luxembourg City, even a big site.
Asch-Schifflange, the Metze.
But they are getting started in a way. So, but for years and years, that was a thing that they could have done. I think first of all, it's a thing about security there on those sites. So it has to be secured, because often those sites are like, before they start doing something, it's like no entry, please, but it's too dangerous because they don't know what the buildings are at. But it would be a really nice idea. With the regulations in Luxembourg, they would have to change the zoning though to do it. But they could do that for like a period of time and for a pilot project. or like a project for like 5 or 10 years. In Delft, it is absolutely the same thing.
Yes.
So they have 5 years and then they can go to 10, but 10 is the absolute maximum. And then the city says, okay, until then we don't have any purpose for this area, but after that we want to do like the whole area, redo the area.
Personally, I think this is also a really good idea to help test out the different types of contracts between tiny house communities, villages, or people and the landowners, whether it's a commune or whether it's an individual private person. Because, you know, one thing that I personally think about a lot and try and talk about is this idea of what does this contract look like? Because it is such an unusual setup between tenant and landlord. It's not a tenant in a building that the landlord is taking care of. It is actually a person's personal property on this piece of land. And, you know, there's the inclusion of utilities and the maintenance of utilities. And then there's the lease. How long is this going to be allowed? What sort of possibilities does the person who owned the tiny house have with the land? Can we plant things that are going to stay there? Can we plant trees? One thing that really interests me with regards to these industrial sites is how maybe the pilot project could, like in Delft, include actually repairing the soil. If the soil has been highly industrialized, what sort of planting or what sort of, you know, other alternatives to bring that soil back to a healthy state? You know, maybe include research or have it be, you know, this opportunity for learning and not just, oh, we have this piece of land, we want to make some money off it while we're waiting to find out what's going to happen there. Let's put a tiny house community there, right? Like have it be beneficial on many levels.
Bringing us back to the idea of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves, of having that cross-exchange between different scientific branches and different researchers.
Yeah, and I think it's this kind of information and this kind of research and these kinds of pilot projects that can really enrich the information and decision-making process here in Luxembourg for these things.
Because we don't have any expertise. The only expertise I have is a bit more than a year living in a tiny house.
Yeah, and I don't.
And for the rest of it, we haven't built tiny houses, we haven't built tiny house villages, we haven't lived in tiny house villages, and we haven't created communities. Who are we? What have we done?
And
no,
sure.
But literally, there is no. This also we're growing with all of those things, and I think we always said we were very much for pilot projects, for example, because a pilot project from 5 to 10 years would give everyone the opportunity to find out what makes sense for the country, for the city they're in, so also for the regulations that have to be done.
Yeah, learn together. Learn together.
Now they like the people that are living in, but also the national politics and the local politics and project takers, whoever could learn of pilot projects before it's like open up to everyone.
This again, for me, especially as an American, comes from that bottom-up mentality, because we have politicians who are making these decisions without any experience, without any knowledge, and you know, we would like them to utilize us, to utilize other people, to utilize these pilot projects in order to make better long-term decisions.
You will be the utilizer.
We're happy to be utilized.
So I have a quirky question for you both. You have probably thought about this already, but if you could move Nickie, if you could move your tiny house anywhere in the world, where would you move it to?
Oh gosh. I think the spot I'm in right now is actually perfect. We're at my parents' garden. I love the spot itself with the huge garden. I love it with my parents. I love the town I'm in. I lived there when I was little. I would just love to have that spot opened up in a bigger space so I can have like community people in. Because for me, also when we're talking not anywhere in the world, but Luxembourg, it would be the choice of the spot is with the people. So that could be the nicest spot if on this spot it's not some of the people that I've been working with for the last years. It's not the community that I wanted. Like personally, what I always like, if you go worldwide, a little bit of like a seaside would be like to have a beach, small beach.
To hear the waves in the morning.
Exactly. I had a nice spot in New Zealand where we had it on a camping ground, so that was epic. That was epic to just lay down in the camper van and hear the waves. That was nice.
I mean, of course, one of the concepts of a tiny house is its mobility. You know, whether you have it on wheels or not, a tiny house could almost fit anywhere, and to be able to move it. I mean, we talk about these pilot projects that would last 5 or 10 years. Where do the houses go after that?
Mm-hmm. So they're just taken and being put up somewhere else.
Can
again.
be, yeah.
But I definitely agree with Nickie. I think, you know, I have my own personal preferences for locations that I like to visit on vacation, or, where I would love to live, you know, but it comes down to long-term who you're living with or who you're living around. The community, maybe not just your neighborhood, but the village that you're living in, the town, the city that you're living in. I think that plays a huge part in it for me.
You can have the nicest spot if your neighbors are just not on your line. You will not be able to just lay down and relax. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that beautiful answer. I think it might be quiz time.
It's quiz time, yeah. It's quiz time.
Definitely, it's quiz time right now. So all of our guests are being tortured with 2 questions they usually don't know, but they always have like 3 alternatives. So you will not be lost completely in the end.
Well, I have lived here for 10 years. My dad is Luxembourgish. Like, I know a little bit.
Okay, the first question has something to do with, I think, with a mountain you should know, working for Transition Minett. And
oh gosh, embarrassing.
Laura, you should know it. It's a landmark here in the south, and Nickie, you should know it as well. It's the Zollver Knop.
Okay.
It's the landmark of the municipality of Zarnem. And if you just turn around, just over the brushes there, you might be able to see it.
Yes, okay.
You see it like from the German border, from Luxembourg City and from Arlon. It's really a landmark. Okay. And it's a high landmark. I want to know from you, how high is that Mount Solleuvre?
And we're talking in meters.
Yes, I don't have the height. I don't have the height in foot. I'm sorry. No, in meters, 378, 422, or 559.
378, 452, 579.
378, 422, 559.
I'm going to go with 422 only because my area code in Ash is 4122, so I'm just taking that for
It must be correct, Jan. Tell us, please.
Yes, it is.
Nice.
Yes, 559. It's the highest point of Luxembourg. It's way up in the north on the Belgian border.
Can I tell a funny side note? So I used to live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and this is at a very, very high elevation. And one of the sayings living there, which I'm not sure if it's still true, I lived there 20 years ago, was that elevation is higher than population. Yeah. But that was in feet. Also.
Even in feet, it shouldn't happen here in the
Definitely
Minett.
Not. Well.
And then our second question.
So we talked about the Source Bel-Val. I'm coming back to the Source Bel-Val. So they said that it's really healthy, the water of the Source Bel-Val. And for that repetition, it got some... how do you say it? Auszeichnungen. Prizes, yeah. And it got several gold medals. So
like the wine or the beer, the water also has
awards,
awarding ceremonies.
And it was like a gold medal. And how much gold medals got it? So A, 5, B, 110, or C, around 40.
It was a big player at the beginning of the last century.
I go with the third one, I guess. Is it the middle? Is it
Around 40.
Around 40?
Yes.
Oh, yay.
Nice.
Do I get get one?
Do you get a medal as well?
Yeah, also a gold
We
medal.
can get a medal.
You answered both of the questions
Oh,
correctly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the champagne? Yay.
We'll open it just after the podcast,
Oh,
okay?
nice. I'm in. Can we stop
We can
now?
sit on the bench outside.
Schmengen de Champes rift an lo?
I was going to quote a beautiful little German anecdote from Joseph Statioun, Mr. Bel-Val.
Oh, yes,
Mr. Bel-Val,
please.
because there is the pavilion, which is going to...
Yeah, the inauguration was now in beginning of May.
The pavilion Source Bel-Val. Jan, can you just briefly tell me?
It was a project for Ash 2022 in the Park Belval, close to, the whole new quarter of Belval that's been built in the last few years to a little bit get back the memory of the water of the spring they used to have there, and also of the...
And you can listen to these beautiful historical stories about the earth and about the minerals and
about the water, and they actually rediscovered the source a few years ago, but they don't use the water in the pavilion for the source. It's not used at the moment.
Yeah.
One never knows if they are going to find some use for it again. And it's definitely worth a trip, Park Belval, just between Bellevaux and Belval. And they also have an app that tells you in augmented reality a little bit the story of the valley, of the source, of the fabric that was on it to get the water out of it.
That's really cool. Do you know if it's in multiple languages?
That's a good question. We'll have to check.
I would tell you a little German quote from Joseph Statioun now, because I think it's actually quite beautiful, and no one knows that where Bel-Val comes from, the name. Es sprudelt die Quelle, sie sprudelt so helle, sie fließt im schönen Tal, drum nennt man sie Bel-Val.
Oh.
Now we can have some champagne.
I think,
Ja, Sprudling.
I
Sprudling
think
Champagne.
das lo dann Zeit wirklich für de Crema aus dem Frigo zu hören. Vielmals merci für Ihren Besuch, Laura und Nickie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Kurz der Appell gemacht, Hashtag Minett Mesche ab, wann der als irgendwo taggen wollt an der grossen weiter Welt von den sozialen Medien. Minett Mesche ab auf Instagram, da fand der Reis auch.
Followen.
Darüber sind wir immer froh. Wir so merci für die Nullaussteren. Und ich habe Rendezvous letzte Freude vom Juni mit einem interessanten Gast. Vielmals merci und ciao.